CEO pretended to be broke and was rejected by 99 women, until one humble black girl said yes. The mahogany doors of Hayes & Associates law firm had never felt heavier as Ethan Hayes pushed them open that cold Tuesday morning. At 32, he commanded boardrooms across 3 continents, owned properties in 7 countries, and had his face plastered on Forbes covers more times than he cared to count. But today, sitting across from his grandmother's lawyer, he felt like a lost child. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Ethan's voice cracked slightly, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. Mr. Whitmore, a silver-haired man who had known Ethan since he was in diapers, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and cleared his throat. "Your grandmother's will is quite unconventional, Ethan. She was very specific about her conditions." The leather chair creaked as Ethan leaned forward, his hands trembling slightly. His grandmother, Margaret Hayes, had been the cornerstone of his life. She'd built the Hayes hospitality empire from a single bed and breakfast into a global powerhouse worth billions. More importantly, she'd raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12. The inheritance, all $8.7 billion of it, comes with a clause. Mr. Whitmore continued, his voice gentle but firm. "You must marry a woman who loves you for who you truly are, not for your wealth or status. And you have exactly 3 years to find her." Ethan's jaw dropped. "You can't be serious." "I'm afraid she was deadly serious. She recorded a video message for you." Mr. Whitmore turned his laptop screen toward Ethan. The familiar face of his grandmother appeared, her silver hair perfectly styled, her eyes twinkling with the same mischief that had gotten them both into trouble countless times during his childhood. "My dearest Ethan," her voice filled the room. "If you're watching this, then I'm gone, and you're probably thinking your old grandmother has lost her mind." She chuckled, the sound bringing tears to Ethan's eyes. "But hear me out, darling boy. I've watched you from afar these past years, surrounded by people who see dollar signs when they look at you. I've seen the loneliness in your eyes at family gatherings, the way you question every friendship, every relationship." Ethan's chest tightened. She had seen right through him, as always. "You need to find someone who loves Ethan the man, not Ethan the billionaire. Someone who would choose you if you had nothing but the clothes on your back and a dream in your heart. If you fail to find this person and marry her within 3 years, the entire fortune goes to charity. Every last penny." The video ended, leaving Ethan staring at the blank screen in stunned silence. "There's more," Mr. Whitmore said softly. "She left detailed instructions. She suggests you adopt a different identity. Live as an ordinary person would. Experience what it's like to be wanted for yourself alone." Ethan laughed bitterly. "She wants me to pretend to be poor? She wants you to discover who you really are when the money is stripped away. And more importantly, who would love that person?" That night, Ethan stood in his penthouse overlooking the city, his grandmother's words echoing in his mind. The challenge seemed impossible. How could he trust that anyone's love was genuine? How many times had he watched relationships crumble the moment his bank account entered the conversation? He thought about Sarah, his ex-fiancée, who had left him for a tech mogul with a younger fortune. He remembered Jennifer, who had mapped out their entire future based on his investment portfolio before their 3rd date. And countless others who had seen him as a golden ticket rather than a person. But his grandmother's voice whispered in his memory. "Sometimes the most beautiful flowers grow in the most unexpected places, Ethan. You just have to be brave enough to plant yourself in unfamiliar soil." 3 days later, Ethan stood in a thrift store, buying clothes he would never have looked at twice. Worn jeans, basic t-shirts, a jacket with a small tear near the pocket. He rented a tiny studio apartment in a middle-class neighborhood under the name E.J. Thompson. He created a new identity, a freelance web designer struggling to make ends meet. The transformation was remarkable. Without his designer suits and luxury car, without the deference that money commanded, Ethan discovered something surprising. He was invisible. Ordinary. Just another face in the crowd. He set up profiles on dating apps with his new identity. No mention of wealth, No photos in exotic locations or expensive restaurants. Just EJ, the guy who took the bus to work and ate ramen for dinner more often than he cared to admit. His plan was ambitious: date 10,000 women. Surely among 10,000, he would find one whose heart wasn't made of gold-plated calculations. The first date was with Amanda, a marketing executive who seemed charming online. They met at a small cafe, and within minutes, she was checking her phone and glancing at the door. "So, what kind of car do you drive?" she asked, barely touching her coffee. "I don't have one," Ethan replied honestly. "I take the bus mostly." Her smile faltered. "Oh, that's interesting. What about vacations? Where was your last trip?" "I haven't traveled much lately. Money's been tight." The date ended 20 minutes later with a polite excuse about an early morning meeting. Date number 2 was with Rebecca, a teacher who seemed more promising. She talked about her students with genuine passion, and Ethan felt a flicker of hope. But when the check came and he suggested they split it, her demeanor changed completely. "You asked me out?" she said coldly. "A gentleman pays." When Ethan explained he was on a tight budget, she stood up and left without another word. By date 50, a pattern had emerged. Women who seemed interested online became distant when they saw his modest clothes. Those who agreed to second dates often disappeared when they realized he couldn't afford expensive restaurants or weekend getaways. Date 127 was particularly painful. Monica, a beautiful artist, seemed perfect until she asked to see his apartment. The moment she stepped into his tiny studio, her face changed. "This is where you live?" she asked, unable to hide her disappointment. "I mean, it's cozy." She left that night and never returned his calls. Months turned into years. Ethan kept meticulous records: 1,000 dates, 2,000 dates, 5,000 dates. Each rejection chipped away at his hope. Some women were cruel, mocking his second-hand clothes or laughing at his confession that he couldn't afford to split an expensive dinner. Others were polite but distant, their interest evaporating like morning mist when they realized he wasn't their ticket to a better life. The worst were those who discovered his real identity despite his precautions. A reverse image search, a mutual friend, a careless moment when he forgot to hide his expensive watch. Their attitudes would transform overnight. Suddenly, they were interested in his business, his properties, his vision for the future, which always seemed to include them as his glamorous partner. "I've always been attracted to ambitious men," they would say, the same words with different faces, different voices, but always the same hollow ring. As he approached date 9,999, Ethan felt something inside him break. He sat in his small apartment, looking at the tally marks on his wall: 9,998 rejections. Not one woman had chosen him when he had nothing to offer but himself. Maybe his grandmother had been wrong. Maybe love without conditions was a fairy tale, as fictional as the humble identity he'd created. Maybe everyone had a price, and his mistake was thinking otherwise. With a heavy heart, he scheduled one final date. Number 10,000. After this, he would return to his real life, accept that genuine love was impossible, and let the inheritance go to charity. At least some good would come from his failed experiment. He had no idea that his grandmother's real test was just beginning, and that sometimes the most profound love comes disguised as the simplest human kindness. 2.5 years into his experiment, Ethan had perfected the art of disappointment. He could predict the exact moment a woman would lose interest, usually when she realized his worn sneakers weren't a fashion statement, or when he suggested a picnic instead of dinner at a 5-star restaurant. Date 3,847 was particularly memorable. Jessica, a real estate agent, had seemed genuinely interested until their second meeting. She'd suggested they grab lunch at an upscale bistro downtown. "I'll just have a salad," Ethan had said, scanning the menu's astronomical prices. "I'm not that hungry." Jessica's perfectly manicured eyebrows shot up. "Come on, live a little. The lobster here is amazing. It's just, I'm trying to stick to a budget this month." The shift in her demeanor was immediate and brutal. Her warm smile turned glacial, her eyes scanning him from head to toe as if seeing him for the first time. "Budget?" she repeated, the word dripping with disdain. "What kind of man takes a woman out and can't even afford to feed her properly?" She left before the appetizers arrived, but not before announcing loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "This is exactly why I only date men with real careers." Date 4521 brought Melissa, who seemed different. She worked at an animal shelter, talked passionately about rescue dogs, and didn't seem to care about expensive things. Ethan allowed himself to hope, until their third date when she casually mentioned her ex-boyfriend. "Brad was such a provider," she sighed wistfully. "He bought me this gorgeous necklace for our 2-month anniversary. Took me to the Maldives for Valentine's Day. I just felt so secure with him." When Ethan remained silent, she continued. "I mean, I'm not materialistic or anything, but a girl needs to feel cherished, you know? Like, when a man invests in you, it shows he's serious about the future." The unspoken comparison hung heavy between them. Ethan, who couldn't afford to invest in weekend getaways or expensive jewelry, was clearly falling short of her definition of serious. But the worst rejection came on date 6293. Her name was Vanessa, and she was different from the others, or so Ethan thought. She was a social worker, dedicated to helping underprivileged children. She seemed to genuinely enjoy their conversations about books, philosophy, and life's deeper meanings. For 6 weeks, Ethan dared to believe he'd found someone who valued substance over surface. Then came the night she suggested they grab drinks with her friends. Ethan arrived at the trendy bar to find Vanessa surrounded by her well-dressed social circle: lawyers, doctors, investment bankers. The moment he walked in wearing his thrift store jacket, he felt the collective judgment. "This is EJ." Vanessa introduced him, her voice lacking its usual warmth. Her friend Rachel, draped in designer everything, looked him up and down with barely concealed disgust. "So EJ, what do you do?" "I'm a freelance web designer," Ethan replied, trying to ignore the way they were all staring at his scuffed shoes. "How artistic," Rachel said with a smirk. "And business is good?" "It has its ups and downs." The questions continued, each one designed to highlight his modest circumstances. Where did he live? What kind of car did he drive? Had he traveled anywhere interesting lately? Each honest answer seemed to diminish him further in their eyes. Later that night, Vanessa walked him to the bus stop, a gesture that felt more like a final escort than romantic chivalry. "My friends think you're not ambitious enough for me," she said, unable to meet his eyes. "And honestly, EJ, I'm starting to wonder if they're right. I mean, I want someone who can match my energy, you know? Someone who's going places." "Where exactly do you think I'm going?" Ethan asked, genuine curiosity mixing with heartbreak. "I don't know," she admitted. "That's the problem." The bus arrived, its doors opening with a mechanical wheeze that seemed to echo Ethan's deflated spirit. As he climbed aboard, he heard her heels clicking away into the night, each step a nail in the coffin of his dwindling hope. By date 8000, Ethan had developed what he called rejection radar. He could spot the moment of disillusionment from across a coffee shop. The subtle eye roll when he pulled out a coupon. The way conversations died when he mentioned taking the subway. The polite but firm, "I'll call you," that they both knew was a lie. Some women were crueler than others. Date 8756 laughed in his face when he suggested they cook dinner at his apartment instead of going out. "What am I, a college student?" she snorted. "I'm 31 years old. I've earned the right to be taken care of." Others were more subtle in their dismissal. They would simply stop responding to texts, their interest evaporating like steam once they realized he wasn't their ticket to a more comfortable life. The most painful discoveries came when women found out his real identity through social media sleuthing or mutual connections. Their transformations were swift and shameless. Suddenly, they were fascinated by his business acumen and entrepreneurial spirit. They wanted to know about his cars, his houses, his investment strategies. They began dropping hints about expensive tastes and luxury dreams, painting pictures of the glamorous life they could build together. Date 9456 was particularly brazen. After discovering his true identity, she showed up to their next meeting with photos of wedding venues and honeymoon destinations. "I've always dreamed of a destination wedding in Tuscany," she gushed, as if they were already engaged. "And I think a vineyard would be so romantic for our reception, don't you?" As date 9999 approached, Ethan sat in his small apartment, staring at the wall covered in tally marks. Each mark represented not just a failed date, but a small death of hope. His grandmother's words, once full of wisdom and possibility, now seemed like the naive wishes of someone who had forgotten how cold the world could be. Maybe authentic love was a luxury only the poor could afford, and only because they had nothing else to lose. The morning of date 10,000 arrived gray and drizzling, matching Ethan's mood perfectly. He sat at the edge of his narrow bed, staring at his phone screen displaying the dating app notification. Her name was Nia Johnson, 20 years old, library assistant and part-time tutor. Her profile was refreshingly simple: no glamorous vacation photos, no designer clothes, just a genuine smile and eyes that seemed to hold actual warmth instead of calculated interest. "Last one," Ethan muttered to himself, pulling on his worn denim jacket. "Then I'm done with this insanity." They had agreed to meet at Cornerstone Cafe, a small coffee shop near the downtown library where Nia worked. Ethan arrived 15 minutes early, ordering a simple black coffee and claiming a table by the window. He had developed a routine over the years: arrive early, observe the woman as she entered, and brace himself for the inevitable disappointment. At exactly 2 p.m., she walked in. Nia Johnson was nothing like the polished women he'd been meeting. She wore a simple yellow sundress that looked like it came from a department store sale rack, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She carried a worn canvas bag that had seen better days, and her shoes were comfortable flats that had clearly been chosen for walking rather than impressing. But something about her presence filled the room differently. She moved with quiet confidence, nodding kindly to the barista, stepping aside to let an elderly man pass, her eyes scanning the cafe with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. When her gaze found his, she smiled, not the practiced, dazzling smile he'd grown accustomed to, but something real and unguarded. "EJ?" she asked, approaching his table. "That's me." He stood, extending his hand. Her handshake was firm and warm. "I'm Nia. Sorry I'm right on time. I hope you weren't waiting long." "Not at all. Can I get you something? Coffee? Tea?" This was the first test. In his experience, women either ordered the most expensive item on the menu to see if he'd flinch, or they judged him for not insisting on paying regardless of their preferences. Nia glanced at the menu board, then back at him with a gentle smile. "You know what? I'm actually pretty caffeinated already. Had a huge coffee at work an hour ago. Would you mind if we just walked instead? There's a nice little park about 2 blocks from here, and it's finally stopped raining." Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "You want to walk? If that's okay with you. I spend most of my day inside the library, so I try to get outside when I can. Plus, walking makes conversation easier, don't you think? Less pressure than sitting across from each other trying to think of the perfect thing to say." For the first time in years, Ethan felt himself genuinely smile. "I'd like that." They walked to Meridian Park, a small green space tucked between old brownstones. The recent rain had left everything fresh and clean, puddles reflecting the gray sky like scattered mirrors. Nia seemed completely comfortable with the modest setting, pointing out interesting architecture and sharing stories about the neighborhood. "I love this area," she said as they found a dry bench under a large oak tree. "It has character, you know? Not like those sterile new developments where every building looks identical." "You've lived here long?" Ethan asked. "About 3 years. I moved here after finishing my master's degree. Library science," she added with a self-deprecating laugh. I know, not exactly the most glamorous career path. Why library science?" Her face lit up in a way that made Ethan's chest tighten unexpectedly. Because libraries are magic, EJ. Think about it. They're one of the last places in the world where anyone can access anything, regardless of how much money they have. A homeless man can sit next to a CEO and they're both just people looking for knowledge, or escape, or connection. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, suddenly self-conscious. Sorry, I get a little passionate about my work. My friends tease me about it. Don't apologize, Ethan said quietly. It's refreshing to meet someone who loves what they do. They talked for 2 hours, conversation flowing like water finding its natural course. Nia asked about his web design work with genuine curiosity, listening as he described his struggles with difficult clients and irregular income. She didn't offer advice about networking, or suggest he think bigger, she simply listened. It must be challenging, she said thoughtfully. Creating something beautiful for someone else when you can't always predict their vision. Exactly. Ethan breathed, amazed that someone finally understood. Some clients want to micromanage every pixel, others give you complete freedom then hate everything you create. It's like trying to paint someone else's dreams. When he talked about taking the bus, she didn't wrinkle her nose or change the subject. Instead, she shared her own public transportation stories, the regular commuters she'd come to recognize, the books she was currently reading during her rides, the unexpected conversations that sometimes happen between strangers. I actually prefer the bus to driving, she admitted. It gives me time to think, you know? And people watching is endlessly fascinating. As the afternoon sun began to filter through the clouds, Ethan realized something extraordinary was happening. For the first time in 9,999 attempts, he wasn't being interviewed for the position of provider. Nia wasn't calculating his net worth or evaluating his potential as a lifestyle upgrade. She was simply present, engaged, real. When he mentioned his small apartment, she didn't probe about square footage or neighborhood property values. When he suggested they grab dinner at a casual pizza place, she didn't counter with somewhere more expensive. When he offered to pay for her slice and she politely declined, splitting the check down the middle, it wasn't a test or a statement. It was just who she was. I had a really nice time today, she said as they waited at her bus stop as the evening settled around them. So did I, Ethan replied, and meant it more than he'd meant anything in years. Would you like to do this again sometime? Maybe next weekend? For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. After 9,999 rejections, someone was asking for a second date. Someone who had spent hours with the broke, ordinary version of himself and wanted more. I love that, he managed. As her bus arrived and she climbed aboard, waving goodbye through the window, Ethan stood on the sidewalk feeling something he'd almost forgotten existed: hope. For the first time in 3 years, he couldn't wait to see what tomorrow would bring. The following Saturday, Nia suggested they meet at Morrison's Used Books, a cramped little shop squeezed between a laundromat and a small deli. The moment Ethan stepped inside, he was hit by the comforting smell of old paper and worn leather bindings. Narrow aisles wound between towering shelves that reached toward a tin ceiling painted the color of faded sunflowers. I know it's not much to look at, Nia said, appearing from behind a stack of philosophy books. But Mr. Morrison has been collecting books for 40 years. There are treasures hidden everywhere. She was wearing jeans and a soft green sweater that brought out the warmth in her dark eyes. Her hair was loose today, framing her face in gentle waves. Ethan found himself staring, struck by how naturally beautiful she was without trying. I love it, he said honestly. It feels like a real bookstore. They spent the morning wandering the narrow aisles, Nia sharing stories about authors and pulling random books from shelves to read him interesting passages. When she discovered a worn copy of Maya Angelou's poetry, her face lit up with the same joy he'd seen when she talked about her library work. Listen to this, she said, flipping to a dog-eared page. There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. Isn't that beautiful? Ethan watched her as she read, noting the way her voice softened with reverence for the words. He realized he was falling for more than just her kindness. He was falling for her mind, her passion, the way she saw magic in simple things. Over the following weeks, they fell into an easy rhythm. Wednesday evening walks through different neighborhoods, Saturday morning bookstore adventures, Sunday afternoon picnics in various parks around the city. Nia never suggested expensive restaurants or complained about their modest outings. She seemed genuinely content exploring the city's free museums, trying food trucks, or simply sitting on park benches talking about everything and nothing. "Tell me about your family," she asked one evening as they shared a pizza on his apartment's fire escape, watching the sunset paint the city in shades of gold and orange. Ethan's chest tightened. He'd carefully crafted EJ's backstory: parents who'd died when he was young, raised by an aunt who'd passed away recently. It was close enough to his real story to feel authentic, but different enough to protect his identity. "I lost my parents when I was 12, he said quietly. "Car accident. My grandmother raised me after that." "I'm so sorry," Nia said, her hand finding his. "That must have been incredibly difficult." "She was amazing. Tough as nails but full of love. She taught me that who you are matters more than what you have." The irony of those words hit him like a punch to the gut. Here he was, lying about who he was while quoting his grandmother's wisdom about authenticity. "She sounds wonderful," Nia said softly. "I would have loved to meet her. She would have adored you," Ethan replied, and knew with absolute certainty that it was true. As the weeks passed, Ethan found himself living a double life in ways he never expected. By day, he was still Ethan Hayes, billionaire CEO, attending board meetings and making decisions that affected thousands of employees. But every moment spent with Nia felt more real than anything in his corporate world. "I've been thinking about taking a pottery class," Nia mentioned one Saturday as they wandered through a street art festival. "There's something appealing about creating something beautiful with your hands, you know? Something that exists because you made it exist." "That sounds amazing," Ethan said, watching her eyes light up as she examined a local artist's ceramic bowls. "Would you want to take it with me? I know it's kind of silly." "It's not silly at all. I'd love to try it." The truth was, Ethan would have tried anything to spend more time with her. Fire walking, interpretive dance, competitive bird watching, it didn't matter. Being with Nia felt like coming home after years of wandering. But as his feelings deepened, so did his guilt. Every laugh they shared, every moment of connection, felt built on a foundation of lies. When she talked about her work at the library with such passion, he wanted to tell her about the literacy programs his company funded. When she worried about her student loan payments, he wanted to solve her problems with a single phone call. The inheritance deadline loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon, only 14 days away. Ethan lay awake nights, staring at the ceiling of his small apartment, torn between two impossible choices. He could continue the charade, marry Nia under false pretenses, and secure his inheritance while living a lie for the rest of his life. Or he could tell her the truth and risk losing the first person who had ever loved him for who he really was. "You seem distracted lately," Nia observed one evening as they walked along the river. The city lights reflected in the dark water like fallen stars. "Everything okay?" Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. "Just work stuff. Nothing major." But it was major. It was everything. Because somewhere between date 10,000 and their pottery class registration, something had shifted. The inheritance that had once seemed like everything now felt insignificant compared to the woman walking beside him, her hand warm in his, her laughter echoing across the water. For the first time in his life, Ethan Hayes had found something more valuable than money. And he was terrified he was about to lose it all. "Nia," he said suddenly, stopping beside the river railing. "Yes?" He looked into her eyes, seeing trust and affection, and something deeper that made his chest ache with hope and fear in equal measure. The words burned in his throat, the truth, the whole truth, everything he'd been hiding. He swallowed hard. "I need to tell you something important. Soon." She smiled, squeezing his hand. "Whatever it is, EJ, we'll figure it out together." Okay? 14 days. He had 14 days to find the courage to risk everything on the hope that love might be stronger than deception. The Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom glittered like a constellation fallen to earth. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across walls draped in midnight blue silk, while 500 of the city's most influential people mingled in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. The annual Children's Future Foundation Gala was the social event of the season, and Ethan Hayes, the real Ethan Hayes, was its guest of honor. He stood at the edge of the crowd, adjusting his bow tie with trembling fingers. In 3 hours, he would give the keynote speech announcing a $50 million donation to literacy programs nationwide. But first, he had to tell Nia the truth. She stood beside him, beautiful and completely out of place in a simple black dress she'd bought from a discount store that afternoon. When he'd called her that morning asking if she'd accompany him to a work event, she'd been excited about seeing this part of his life. If only she knew. "EJ, this place is incredible," she whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the opulent surroundings. "Your client must be really important to invite you to something like this." Ethan's stomach churned. "Nia, I need to tell you something." "Mr. Hayes." A photographer appeared, camera flashing. "Could we get a few shots for the society pages?" The blood drained from Ethan's face. Before he could respond, the photographer was already snapping pictures, calling out to others nearby. "Ethan Hayes is here! Mr. Hayes, this way please!" Nia's hand slipped from his arm. He turned to see her staring at him with growing confusion and horror as more photographers surrounded them, shouting questions. "Mr. Hayes, how does it feel to be Forbes' youngest billionaire philanthropist? Any comment on the merger with International Hospitality Group? Is this your girlfriend? What's her name?" The crowd parted around them like water around a stone. Whispers followed in their wake as people recognized him, the CEO whose face graced magazine covers, whose business deals made international headlines, whose very presence at an event was news. Nia stood frozen in the chaos, her face pale as understanding crashed over her like a cold wave. The man she'd been dating for months, the struggling web designer who rode the bus and worried about paying rent, was one of the wealthiest men in the country. "Nia!" Ethan reached for her, but she stepped back as if he were a stranger. "Ladies and gentlemen," the event coordinator announced from the stage, "please welcome our keynote speaker and tonight's presenting sponsor, CEO of Hayes Hospitality Empire, Mr. Ethan Hayes." The applause was thunderous. 500 people turned to look at him expectantly, but Ethan only saw Nia's face, the devastation in her eyes, the way she was shaking her head slowly as if trying to wake up from a nightmare. "You lied to me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crowd. "Everything was a lie." "No, Nia, please let me explain." But she was already moving, pushing through the crowd toward the exit. Ethan followed, ignoring the confused murmurs of the guests and the flash of cameras capturing his departure from his own event. He caught up with her outside in the hotel's circular driveway where valets scurried between Bentleys and Maseratis. "Nia, wait!" He grabbed her arm gently, and she spun around to face him. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice was steady and cold. "Who are you? Really? I'm still me. I'm still the person you've been getting to know." "No." She shook her head firmly. "The person I've been getting to know was E.J. Thompson, a struggling web designer who took the bus and split pizza bills. That person doesn't exist, does he?" Ethan's throat felt like sandpaper. "My name is Ethan Hayes. Everything else, my feelings for you, our conversations, the way I feel when I'm with you, that was all real." "Real?" Nia laughed bitterly. "You've been conducting some kind of experiment on me. Dating the poor girl to see how she'd react, right? Was this entertaining for you? Watching me worry about student loans while you probably own half the city? It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, Ethan?" His real name sounded foreign in her mouth. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you spent months lying to someone who trusted you completely. Someone who was falling in love with you." The words hit him like physical blows. She was falling in love with him, had been falling in love with him, and he destroyed it all with his deception. "I can explain everything," he said desperately. "My grandmother's will, the inheritance conditions, why I had to." "Had to what? Had to lie? Had to manipulate someone's feelings to get your money?" Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice remained steady. "Do you have any idea what this feels like? I opened my heart to you. I trusted you with things I've never told anyone. I was planning a future with you." A black sedan pulled up to the curb, her rideshare, summoned while he wasn't paying attention. "Nia, please don't go. Give me a chance to explain." She paused with her hand on the car door, looking back at him one final time. In that moment, Ethan saw everything he was losing, not just the woman he loved, but his chance at genuine happiness, at a life built on truth instead of transactions. "You know what hurts the most," she said softly. "It's not that you're rich. I don't care about money, Ethan. It's that you didn't trust me enough to be honest. You were the one thing in my life that felt completely real. And it wasn't." She got into the car, and as it pulled away from the curb, Ethan stood alone under the hotel's glittering lights, surrounded by luxury and wealth and everything he thought he wanted. Inside, 500 people waited for his speech about the importance of giving back, of using privilege to help others. But he couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. He had secured the inheritance by finding someone who loved him without knowing about his wealth. But in winning his grandmother's game, he had lost the only prize that mattered. The next morning, Ethan sat in his lawyer's office, staring at the inheritance paperwork spread across the mahogany desk. "Congratulations," Mr. Whitmore said, his voice carefully neutral. "You've met the conditions of your grandmother's will. The entire estate transfers to you immediately." Ethan picked up the pen, then set it down again. $8.7 billion. More money than most people could comprehend. And all he could think about was the look in Nia's eyes as she realized everything had been a lie. "Actually," he said slowly, "I think I need to prepare different paperwork. I want to donate it all to charity." Mr. Whitmore's eyebrows shot up. "Ethan, perhaps we should discuss." "No," Ethan said firmly, standing up. "My grandmother was wrong. Love can't be won through deception. And money can't buy back trust." He walked out of the office, leaving the inheritance behind, carrying only the weight of his mistakes and the fading hope that somehow, someday, he might find a way to earn Nia's forgiveness. 3 days passed in a blur of regret and sleepless nights. Ethan had returned to his penthouse, but it felt like a mausoleum, cold, empty, and filled with expensive things that meant nothing. He tried calling Nia 17 times, each call going straight to voicemail. He'd written dozens of text messages, deleting them all before sending. What could he possibly say that would undo months of deception? On the fourth morning, he sat at his grandmother's old writing desk, staring at a blank piece of paper. If he couldn't speak to Nia, maybe he could write her a letter, not asking for forgiveness, because he didn't deserve it, but simply to tell her that every moment they'd shared had been real for him, even if it couldn't be real for her. The doorbell rang. Ethan's heart stopped. Through the security camera, he saw Nia standing in his hallway, looking small and uncertain but determined. Her hair was pulled back in the same practical ponytail from their first date, and she wore the yellow sundress that had made him fall in love with her simplicity. He opened the door, and for a moment, they just stared at each other. "Nia," he breathed. I need to show you something," she said quietly, holding up a small white envelope. "And then I need you to tell me the whole truth. All of it." She stepped into his penthouse, her eyes taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows, the original artwork, the view of the city that stretched to the horizon. But she didn't seem impressed or intimidated, just sad. "Where did you get that?" Ethan asked, recognizing his grandmother's elegant handwriting on the envelope. "The library," Nia said, sitting down on his couch as if expensive leather was no different from park bench wood. "Yesterday morning, I was processing a donation of old books when I found this tucked inside a poetry collection. It's addressed to the woman who walks away." Ethan's knees went weak. "My grandmother donated those books?" apparently years ago. Mrs. Chin, our head librarian, said a Margaret Hayes brought them in personally and insisted they be kept in our general collection, not sold. Nia's fingers trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. She said if anyone ever came looking for this letter, we should give it to them. With shaking hands, Nia unfolded the cream-colored stationery and began to read aloud. My dear girl, and I do hope you are dear to my grandson's heart. If you are reading this, then you have discovered his deception, and you have left him. Good. You see, my darling, the inheritance was never really about the money. It was about teaching Ethan something crucial, that love built on lies is no love at all, and that the right person will choose truth over comfort, honesty over security. If you walked away not because he was poor, but because he lied to you, then you are exactly the woman I hoped he would find. Someone with integrity. Someone who values character over cash. Someone strong enough to reject a billionaire when he fails to meet your standards for basic human decency. The real test was never whether you would love him without money. The real test was whether you would demand the truth even when it hurt. And by reading this letter you have passed with flying colors. Now, my dear, comes the hardest part, deciding whether someone who failed so spectacularly at honesty deserves a second chance at truth. I cannot make that choice for you. But I will say this. Love is not about perfection. It is about growth. And sometimes the people who make the worst mistakes are the ones who learn the most from them. If you choose to walk away forever, I will understand and respect your decision. But if you choose to try again, I hope you will demand of my grandson the complete honesty he should have given you from the beginning. The money means nothing if it cannot buy wisdom. The inheritance is worthless if it cannot purchase integrity. And my grandson will be truly wealthy only when he learns that your love was worth more than all his billions combined. Choose wisely, my dear. But know that whatever you choose, I am proud of you for demanding better. With admiration and hope, Margaret Hayes. Nia folded the letter carefully, her hands no longer shaking. When she looked up at Ethan, her eyes were dry but serious. She knew, Ethan whispered. She planned all of this. The whole truth, Ethan, Nia said firmly. Why did you lie to me? What was really going on? And so Ethan told her everything. The will, the condition, the 3-year deadline, the 9,999 women who had rejected him when he had nothing to offer. He told her about the loneliness, the cynicism, the way each rejection had convinced him that authentic love was impossible. I wasn't experimenting on you, he said, his voice breaking. I was protecting myself. I'd been hurt so many times that I convinced myself pretending to be poor was the only way to find someone real. I never expected to actually fall in love. And when you did fall in love? Nia asked. I was terrified. Every day I wanted to tell you the truth, but every day I was more afraid of losing you. The irony is that by trying to protect what we had, I destroyed it anyway. Nia was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city below. Your grandmother was a wise woman, she said finally. Yes, she was. She was also a little manipulative. Despite everything, Ethan smiled. That too. Nia turned to face him fully. I've spent 3 days hating you, Ethan. 3 days trying to convince myself that everything we shared was fake. But I couldn't do it. Because even though you lied about your name and your job and your bank account, you couldn't fake the way you looked at me when I talked about books. You couldn't fake how you listened when I worried about my students. You couldn't fake the way you made me feel safe and valued and seen. Hope flickered in Ethan's chest like a candle in the wind. I loved the man I met in that cafe, Nia continued. I still do. But I need to know, can you be that man with your real name? Can you be honest and humble and genuine when you're Ethan Hayes instead of E.J. Thompson? I want to try, Ethan said. I want to be the man you fell in love with, but without any lies between us. No pretending, no hiding, no games. Just us. Nia stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling city. I don't care about the money, Ethan. I need you to understand that. I don't want your wealth or your lifestyle or your connections. I want your honesty. I want your heart. I want the man who was content to share pizza on a fire escape because he was sharing it with me. That's who I want to be, Ethan said, moving to stand beside her. That's who I am with you. She turned to him, and for the first time in days, he saw something other than hurt in her eyes. Then ask me again, she said softly. Ask you what? The question you were building up to before all this happened. The one I could see in your eyes every time you looked at me. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. Slowly, without fanfare or expensive rings or perfect settings, he dropped to one knee right there in his living room. Nia Johnson, he said, his voice steady despite his tears. Will you marry me? Not Ethan Hayes the billionaire, not E.J. Thompson the web designer, but just me? The man who loves you more than money, more than status, more than anything else in this world? Nia looked down at him, and slowly, beautifully, she smiled. Yes, she said. But on one condition. Anything. No more lies. Ever. About anything. I promise, Ethan said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. No more lies. As she pulled him to his feet and into her arms, Ethan realized his grandmother had been right about everything. The inheritance didn't matter. The money was meaningless. He had found something infinitely more valuable, a love built on truth, tested by fire, and strong enough to forgive even the worst mistakes. Outside the windows, the city sparkled in the afternoon sun, but Ethan only saw Nia's face, radiant with forgiveness and hope and the promise of a future built on honesty instead of deception. His grandmother's final lesson was complete. Sometimes the greatest wealth comes not from what you inherit, but from what you choose to build with your own hands and heart.